Picture this moment. It's 1943, somewhere in the American heartland. A train carrying German prisoners of war slows down near Detroit. Through the barbed wire windows, a young Wehrmacht lieutenant named Hans Mueller peers out at something that makes his blood run cold. It's not guards with guns. It's not military fortifications. It's something far more terrifying to a soldier who thought his nation was winning the war. It's a parking lot, a massive parking lot stretching beyond the horizon, filled with thousands upon thousands of brand new B-24 Liberator bombers. Each one fresh off the assembly line, each one gleaming in the afternoon sun, each one representing more aluminum, more engines, more firepower than his entire squadron had seen in months of combat. Mueller turns to his fellow prisoners, and in perfect silence, they all understand the same crushing truth. The war isn't just unwinnable, it was never even close. This is the story of how German POWs discovered America's secret weapon. It wasn't superior tactics or wonder weapons or battlefield courage. It was something far more devastating. It was the unstoppable force of American industrial might. It was assembly lines that never stopped, workers who never quit, factories that treated building bombers like baking bread. What these prisoners witnessed behind American factory walls didn't just break their faith in victory, it shattered their entire understanding of what war even meant. They came as enemies. They left as witnesses to the most overwhelming display of industrial dominance the world had ever seen. And the letters they wrote home? They changed everything. The first German POWs started arriving in America in 1942, expecting to find a nation stretched thin by war. What they found instead defied every piece of propaganda they'd been fed. These weren't desperate Americans scrambling to build weapons. These were people who'd turned war production into something almost casual, almost boring, as routine as making breakfast. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Schneider, captured in North Africa, described his first glimpse of American soil from a troop transport ship entering New York Harbor. The skyline wasn't dark or damaged or showing any signs of struggle. Every building blazed with light. Construction cranes dotted the horizon, building new skyscrapers while their nation was supposedly fighting for survival. The streets below teemed with automobiles. Schneider wrote in his diary that night, "They're not even trying hard yet." The real shock came during transportation to inland camps. German prisoners rode in Pullman cars, the same luxurious train coaches American civilians used. They ate hot meals in dining cars with white tablecloths. Guards offered them cigarettes and chocolate. One captured Luftwaffe pilot, Franz Weber, couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. His unit had been told Americans were starving, rationing everything, scraping barrel bottoms for resources. Yet here he sat, eating steak on a train, watching endless fields of wheat roll by, seeing farm equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction novel. The trains passed through cities that should have been industrial ghost towns. Instead, they hummed with activity. 3 shifts of workers streamed in and out of factories. Parking lots overflowed. Restaurant signs blazed, "Open 24 hours." Store windows displayed goods that had vanished from German shops 3 years earlier. Fresh fruit, new clothes, radios, toys. It was like the war didn't exist. At Camp Concordia in Kansas, new arrivals received the orientation that included a detail that broke many prisoners psychologically. The camp commander casually mentioned that America was building 100,000 aircraft per year. The Germans laughed. It had to be propaganda. Their intelligence said America could maybe produce 20,000 planes annually at absolute maximum capacity. The commander shrugged and arranged a field trip. What happened next would haunt these men forever. Guards loaded 24 prisoners onto buses and drove them to a nearby airfield. Not a military base, just a regular commercial airfield that had been converted for wartime use. Lined up on the tarmac sat row after row of factory-fresh B-17 flying fortresses. The prisoners started counting. They reached 100, then 200, then they stopped counting. These weren't even heading to combat. These were just waiting for ferry pilots, waiting their turn, like cars at a dealership. Sergeant Klaus Hoffmann later testified that this moment killed something inside him, not his will to live, but his will to fight. Because if this was just one random airfield in Kansas, what did the real production centers look like? The American rail system alone told a story that German military planners had completely missed. By 1943, the United States operated 233,000 miles of track, carrying 2 billion tons of freight annually. The entire German Reich, at its absolute peak, managed 47,000 miles. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real shock was how Americans used their rails. German POWs, being transported cross-country, witnessed something their own logistics officers would have considered impossible. Massive freight trains, some pulling over 150 cars, thundered past their passenger coaches every few minutes. Each train categorized, organized, scheduled with military precision, but run by civilians who treated it as routine. Coal trains heading east, grain trains heading to ports, military equipment moving in every direction simultaneously without confusion or collision. At a water stop in Ohio, prisoner Heinz Beckman watched railroad workers perform what looked like a pit crew operation. In 12 minutes, they'd swapped out an entire locomotive, refueled 3 engines, and reorganized 40 cars. The workers weren't rushing. They were laughing, joking, eating sandwiches while they worked. This was just Tuesday to them. The scheduling systems defied German understanding of possibility. American dispatchers coordinated thousands of simultaneous movements using technology and communication systems that seemed pulled from the future. Telegraph lines paralleled every track. Phone systems connected every station. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone moved more tonnage daily than the entire German Eastern Front required monthly. And they did it while complaining about delays. POWs with logistics training started doing the math. They calculated that America's civilian rail network, without even counting military additions, could supply 50 Eastern Fronts simultaneously. One captured Wehrmacht supply officer, Major Erich Reinhardt, wrote to his wife, "They move more steel in a day than we move ammunition in a month. And the steel is just for making refrigerators." The prisoners encountered freight cars that boggled their minds. Refrigerated cars keeping California produce fresh, all the way to New York. Specialized tanker cars carrying enough fuel to supply a panzer division for a week. Flat cars hauling construction equipment that dwarfed anything in German arsenals. And everywhere, on every siding, sat thousands of empty cars, just waiting, just in case they were needed, but nothing prepared them for what they saw near Chicago. A marshalling yard so vast it disappeared into the horizon, 20,000 freight cars being sorted simultaneously, locomotives numbered in the hundreds, switch engines working with ballet-like coordination, tower operators managing traffic flows that would have paralyzed Berlin's entire transport network. This single yard handled more cargo daily than most European nations moved monthly. One prisoner asked a guard how many such yards existed. The guard laughed and said he didn't know, maybe 30 or 40 major ones. The prisoner went silent. Germany had 3 yards that could be called major. America had 40 as backup options. What killed German morale wasn't just the scale, it was the casualness. This miraculous logistics network that would have been Germany's greatest strategic asset was, to Americans, just how things worked. Nothing special, nothing worth bragging about. Then came Willow Run, the bomber plant that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be possible. But there it stood, sprawling across 3.5 million square feet of Michigan farmland. German POWs brought here on propaganda tours meant to break their spirit didn't just lose hope, they lost their grip on reality itself. The production line stretched over a mile long, one continuous mile of assembly positions where B-24 Liberators materialized from raw aluminum. At position 1, workers attached aluminum sheets to frames. By position 465, a complete 4-engine heavy bomber rolled out the door. Every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The math was simple and terrifying. While you ate lunch, America built a bomber. While you slept for 8 hours, America built 8 bombers. Luftwaffe pilot Otto Zimmermann stood frozen, watching workers install engines with the same casual efficiency that German workers might install bicycle wheels. 4 Pratt & Whitney engines, each worth more than most German houses, bolted on in under an hour. The workers weren't specialists with decades of training. Many were teenagers, housewives, farmers who'd learned these skills 6 months ago, yet they worked with precision that would shame German master craftsmen. But Willow Run was just one plant. One single plant producing more heavy bombers than the entire German aviation industry combined. America had dozens of aircraft facilities operating at this scale. North American Aviation's Dallas plant, Boeing's Seattle Fortress, Douglas facilities scattered across California. Each one a Willow Run equivalent. Together they produced aircraft at rates that defied physics, logic, and sanity. The Liberty ship program delivered an even more stunning blow. German naval officers taken to shipyards couldn't process what they witnessed. America was building cargo ships in 4 days. Not 4 months, not 4 weeks. 4 days from keel laying to launch. The SS Robert E. Peary went from raw steel to floating vessel in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. German shipyards needed 8 months minimum for similar vessels. Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, employed 90,000 workers across 4 yards. They'd perfected prefabrication to an art form. Entire ship sections weighing hundreds of tons were built miles inland, transported on special rail cars, and welded together like toy blocks. Workers trained for single specific tasks. One man might spend months just welding the same joint over and over, becoming impossibly fast, impossibly precise. By 1943, America was launching 3 Liberty ships every single day. That's 21 per week. 90 per month, over 1,000 per year. Each ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, or 2,040 jeeps, or 440 tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. German U-boats, hunting desperately, working around the clock, couldn't sink ships faster than America built them. It was like fighting the ocean itself. The psychological impact on German POWs was devastating. Captain Heinrich Müller, a U-boat commander who'd spent years torpedoing Allied shipping, visited a Liberty ship construction site in 1944. He watched a completed vessel slide into the water, and workers immediately began laying the keel for the next one. No celebration, no pause, just back to work. He wrote, "We were sinking drops of water while they opened fire hydrants." These weren't miracles of engineering, they were miracles of process, of standardization, of turning complexity into simplicity, of making the impossible boring. The concept of 3 full shifts was alien to German industrial thinking. In the Reich, factories pushed single shifts to exhaustion, maybe adding overtime when desperation hit. But American plants operated like they'd discovered extra hours in the day. When day shift workers headed home at 4 p.m., night shift workers were already at their stations. The machines never cooled, the assembly lines never stopped. The factories breathed in 8-hour rhythms, inhaling workers, exhaling bombers. At the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit, German POWs witnessed organizational poetry in motion. 30,000 workers split across 3 shifts, producing M4 Sherman tanks with automobile industry efficiency. Each shift had its own complete management structure, its own cafeteria staff, its own maintenance crews. It was 3 complete factories occupying the same building, sharing the same equipment, but never colliding. The scheduling precision stunned German industrial experts among the prisoners. Workers punched time clocks accurate to the minute. Break times coordinated so production never halted. When the noon whistle or blase, half the line went to lunch while the other half continued working. 30 minutes later, they switched. The line never stopped moving. Tanks kept rolling out the door every 3 hours, regular as sunrise. Supply delivery operated with similar choreography. Trucks arrived at loading docks timed to the minute. Parts delivered just as previous supplies ran out. No warehouse space wasted on excess inventory, no production delays waiting for materials. This just-in-time system that Germany couldn't achieve in peacetime, America perfected while building weapons around the clock. Worker facilities boggled POW minds. These weren't just factories but small cities. On-site medical clinics with full surgical capabilities, cafeterias serving hot meals 24 hours, subsidized to cost almost nothing. Recreation rooms with pool tables and libraries. Childcare centers so mothers could work shifts. Some plants had their own bus systems, collecting workers from 50 miles away. General Motors' Buick division alone employed 23,000 workers making aircraft engines. Their facility included a hospital, fire department, and police force. They published their own newspaper. They had a symphony orchestra made up of employees. This single division, making one type of engine, employed more people than entire German aircraft companies. The human machinery operated with mechanical precision. Bathroom breaks scheduled and timed, tool checkout systems that tracked every wrench, quality control inspectors who had authority to stop entire production lines, safety officers who could overrule plant managers. This wasn't chaos barely controlled. This was control so complete it looked effortless. German prisoner Wilhelm Hoffmann, an industrial engineer before the war, calculated that American war plants achieved 92% efficiency rates. German factories on their best days hit maybe 60%. But the Americans did it while working shorter hours, taking regular breaks, and going home to comfortable houses. They achieved more by pushing less. The numbness would set in for POWs after watching these operations. This wasn't maximum effort. This was sustainable effort, repeatable effort. America could maintain this pace forever. Germany was already breaking, and America was just warming up. The night shift would keep working. Tomorrow's shift was already scheduled. Next month's production targets were already set, and everyone knew they'd be exceeded, because that's just what happened. Every single month. Like clockwork that never needed winding. Nothing shattered German morale quite like American abundance. POWs ate better in captivity than they had as free soldiers. Fresh eggs for breakfast, real coffee, not the bitter ersatz substitute Germany had endured for years. Meat at every meal, fresh vegetables even in winter, ice cream on Sundays. One prisoner gained 30 pounds in his first 6 months of captivity. The camps received on the same rations as American military bases, 3,000 calories per day per prisoner, strictly enforced by Geneva Convention observers. But prisoners quickly learned this was just standard American eating. Guards threw away more food than German civilians saw in a week. Kitchen waste from a single mess hall could have fed a German village. Medical care delivered another shock. Camp hospitals had X-ray machines, surgical suites, and medication supplies that exceeded most German field hospitals. Prisoners received dental care, eye exams, and treatment for chronic conditions they'd suffered for years. American doctors performed complex surgeries on enemy prisoners, while German doctors rationed aspirin. Captain Kurt Rossmeisel, wounded and captured in Italy, required major abdominal surgery. The American hospital in Texas had equipment he'd only seen in medical textbooks. The surgeon was a Jewish refugee from Berlin who'd fled in 1936. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a Jewish doctor driven from Germany, now saving German lives with American resources. Rossmeisel recovered in a private room with radio, reading materials, and meals prepared by a nutritionist. But the real revelation came during glimpses of civilian life. POWs working on farms saw American agricultural abundance that defied comprehension, single farms producing more grain than entire German provinces. Mechanical harvesters doing the work of hundreds. Fertilizer applied by aircraft. Irrigation systems that turned deserts into gardens. Farm families lived in houses with electricity, running water, and indoor toilets. Rural Americans, farmers and ranchers, enjoyed luxuries that German city dwellers had forgotten existed. Refrigerators, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, telephones, radios in every room, cars in every driveway. These weren't wealthy Americans. These were ordinary people living ordinary lives. Prisoner work programs allowed Germans to interact with American civilians. They picked cotton in Texas, harvested vegetables in California, worked in canneries in Michigan. Everywhere they encountered the same pattern. Americans worked 8-hour shifts, then went home to houses filled with appliances, ate dinners of plenty, listened to radios reporting war news between entertainment programs. One detail particularly haunted prisoners. American newspapers published want ads begging for workers. Factories couldn't find enough employees, even offering wages that seemed astronomical by German standards. Help wanted signs hung in every shop window. Teenagers made more money in part-time jobs than German professionals earned in their careers. The psychological impact was crushing. America wasn't sacrificing for the war effort. It was barely inconvenienced. Rationing existed but was laughably light. 3 pairs of shoes per year, slightly less sugar, mild gas restrictions. Germans hadn't seen new shoes in 3 years. Sugar was a distant memory. Civilian cars had been confiscated in 1942. Lieutenant Hans Wegner wrote to his mother, "They eat better here than we did before the war started. Their prisoners eat better than our generals. What were we thinking?" The sophistication of American production machinery made German equipment look medieval. POWs with engineering backgrounds stood slack-jawed, watching automation they hadn't imagined possible. Hydraulic presses that could shape entire aircraft wings in single operations. Welding robots that never missed a seam. Precision tools accurate to tolerances German craftsmen couldn't achieve with hand instruments. At the Ford River Rouge complex, German prisoners witnessed vertical integration beyond their wildest dreams. Iron ore entered one end. Finished vehicles drove out the other. Everything between happened under one ownership, one management system, one quality standard. The complex had its own steel mill, glass plant, rubber factory, and power station. It was an entire industrial ecosystem, completely self-sufficient, completely controlled. The measurement and testing equipment stunned German technical officers. X-ray machines checking every weld, Magnaflux systems detecting invisible cracks, hardness testers sampling every batch of steel. statistical quality control that caught defects before they became problems. Germans relied on master craftsmen's trained eyes. Americans relied on machines that never got tired, never missed details, never had bad days. Production line innovations seemed to arrive weekly. Specialized jigs that made precision automatic. Conveyor systems that moved parts weighing tons with button pushers. Paint booths with controlled atmospheres. Drying ovens that cured finishes in minutes instead of days. Each innovation might save just seconds per unit, but when you're building hundreds of units per day, seconds become hours, hours become entire extra aircraft. The standardization was perhaps most impressive. Every rivet identical, every bolt interchangeable. Parts made in California fit perfectly with assemblies from New York. This wasn't craftsmanship. It was something beyond craftsmanship. It was the elimination of craftsmanship in favor of process perfection. A teenage girl with 3 weeks training could produce parts that exceeded the precision of German master machinists with decades of experience. Machine tool production alone told the story. America produced 900,000 machine tools in 1943. Germany managed 180,000. But American tools were more precise, more durable, more specialized. Single factories had machine shops larger than entire German industrial complexes. Backup equipment sat idle, waiting just in case primary machines needed maintenance. The chemical processes were equally advanced. Synthetic rubber production that Germany had pioneered, but America had perfected and scaled. Aluminum refining at volumes that shouldn't be possible. High-octane fuel manufacturing that gave American aircraft significant performance advantages. Explosive production so efficient that artillery shells could be fired with abandon while German gunners counted every round. Major Friedrich Becker, a chemical engineer before the war, toured a DuPont facility manufacturing explosives. He watched continuous production lines where raw materials entered and finished bombs emerged without human hands touching the product. Safety systems with triple redundancies. Quality control that tested random samples from every batch. The plant produced more explosives daily than Germany's largest facility managed monthly, and did it with fewer workers, fewer accidents, and higher purity. The control systems integrated everything. Production schedules linked to supply, deliveries linked to shipping timetables, linked to combat requirements. Information flowed up and down organizational chains at speeds Germany couldn't match with their rigid hierarchies. American factory managers had authority to change production without waiting for permission from Washington. Adaptation happened in hours, not months. This wasn't brute force. This was intelligence applied to production. Every process analyzed, optimized, and standardized, then improved again next month. The transformation in POW psychology followed predictable stages. First came denial. The numbers had to be propaganda. The factory tours had to be elaborate deceptions. America couldn't possibly produce what they claimed. Then came anger, rage at their own leadership for starting an unwinnable war, fury at the lies they'd been fed about American weakness. But the final stage was the killer, acceptance. And with acceptance came a peculiar relief. The war's outcome was no longer their responsibility. They'd fought bravely against impossible odds. No one could blame them for losing to this machine. The weight of personal failure lifted, replaced by recognition of historical inevitability. Letters home from POWs, heavily censored but still revealing, showed this progression. Early 1943 letters insisted Germany would develop wonder weapons to match American production. By late 1943, they urged families to plant gardens, hide valuables, prepare for occupation. By 1944, they were openly telling loved ones the war was lost and to avoid final battles. Camp authorities noticed plummeting escape attempts. Why escape? To return to certain death in a lost cause? POWs who'd initially planned elaborate breakouts now volunteered for work programs. They joined camp orchestras, played sports, took English classes. They were preparing for the post-war world while their comrades were still dying for the pre-war one. The German High Command recognized the danger these prisoners posed to home front morale. Orders went out declaring any POW who returned would be treated as contaminated by enemy propaganda. Repatriated prisoners faced interrogation, surveillance, and restricted duties. The German leadership knew these men had seen the truth, and the truth was toxic to the Nazi narrative. Some prisoners experienced complete ideological conversion. Corporal Erich Neumann, a devoted Nazi Party member, witnessed American production and concluded everything he'd believed was a lie. He volunteered to work in American factories, learned English, and after the war emigrated to Michigan. He wasn't alone. Thousands of POWs applied to stay in America after surrender. But most experienced something subtler. Not love for America, but respect for reality. They'd seen industrial democracy in action. Workers who argued with supervisors without fear. Factories where suggestions from the floor were implemented immediately. Plants where labor unions had real power. This wasn't the American propaganda they'd been warned against. This was a system that worked better than anything they'd known. The social dynamics fascinated them. Black workers operating complex machinery, women supervising production lines, teenagers earning adult wages, recent immigrants in management positions. The American melting pot wasn't perfect, but it was producing bombers at unprecedented rates. Germany's racial purity theories looked especially absurd when Mexican Americans were outproducing Aryan workers by factors of magnitude. Group psychology in camps shifted toward fatalism and future planning. Secret universities formed where prisoners taught each other skills for post-war careers. Democratic committees replaced military hierarchies. Nazi loyalists found themselves isolated, mocked by men who'd seen American reality. The POWs were defeated soldiers, but they were also witnesses to a future that worked. By war's end, German POWs in America had developed a saying: "The Führer promised us the world. The Americans showed us the world. It belonged to them." The statistics were so overwhelming that German officers assumed calculation errors. America produced 300,000 aircraft during the war. Germany managed 120,000. America built 88,000 tanks. Germany built 44,000. But raw numbers didn't tell the whole story. The ratios were what killed hope. By 1944, America was producing more aircraft per month than Germany produced per year. The United States manufactured more trucks in 1943 alone than Germany produced during the entire war. American shipyards launched more tonnage in 1943 than Japan possessed in its entire merchant fleet. These weren't victories. They were mathematical inevitabilities. Aluminum production showed the hopelessness. Germany, even with conquered territories, peaked at 300,000 tons annually. America produced 1.8 million tons in 1944 alone, a 6-to-1 advantage in the basic material for aircraft construction. How do you fight an air war when your enemy has 6 times your raw materials before even counting their superior production methods? The truck numbers were equally crushing. America produced 2.4 million military trucks. Germany built 350,000. But American trucks were standardized, reliable, and maintainable. German vehicles came from dozens of manufacturers with incompatible parts. An American convoy could fix any vehicle with common spare parts. A German convoy needed specific parts for each manufacturer's models. Oil told another mathematical death sentence. America produced 4.7 million barrels per day in 1944. Germany, scraping together production from Romania and synthetic plants, managed 120,000 barrels daily. America burned more fuel in training flights than Germany could allocate to combat operations. Luftwaffe pilots entered combat with 40 hours training. Americans had 300 hours. Do the math on survival rates. Small arms ammunition provided comic relief if tragedy could be funny. America produced 47 billion rounds during the war. That's billion with a B. Germany managed 7 billion. American soldiers could literally afford to miss. German soldiers counted bullets. Marines in the Pacific fired entire belts of machine gun ammunition just to cut down jungle vegetation. German machine gunners were court-martialed for wasting rounds. The multiplier effect compounded everything. America didn't just produce 6 times more aluminum. They used it more efficiently, wasted less, recycled more. So that 6-to-1 advantage became 10-to-1 in actual aircraft. Then factor in better engines, higher octane fuel, superior electronics, and that 10-to-1 became 20-to-1 in combat effectiveness. Food production was almost insulting. America increased agricultural output during the war while sending millions of farmers into military service. Germany couldn't feed itself even with slave labor on conquered farms. Americans gained weight during wartime. Germans were starving by 1944. The average American consumed 3,300 calories daily. German civilians were down to 500 calories by war's end. Steel production, America, 88 million tons in 1943. Germany, 30 million tons. Concrete production, America, 500 million barrels. Germany, 60 million. Rubber, synthetic and natural, America, 1.8 million tons. Germany, 200,000 tons. Every single metric, from ball bearings to bootlaces, showed the same pattern. Overwhelming, insurmountable American advantage. Colonel Werner Haupt, a Wehrmacht logistics officer, spent his captivity calculating what Germany would have needed to match American production. His conclusion, the entire population of Europe, working as slaves, couldn't have matched American output. The numbers didn't just crush belief, they crushed the very concept of competition. German engineering excellence was supposed to compensate for American mass production. The Tiger tank was worth 10 Shermans, they said. The Me-262 jet fighter would sweep Allied bombers from the sky. The V-2 rocket would bring Britain to its knees. Quality would triumph over quantity. Except quantity had a quality all its own. POWs who'd served in panzer divisions knew the truth about German engineering. Tiger tanks were mechanical nightmares. Transmission failures every 100 miles. Fuel consumption that limited operations to hours. So heavy they collapsed bridges, got stuck in mud, couldn't navigate narrow roads. Each Tiger required a dedicated maintenance crew and spare parts that rarely existed. Perfect engineering that couldn't survive imperfect reality. Meanwhile, the Sherman tank was automotive simplicity. It used proven, reliable components. Parts were interchangeable. Any mechanic could fix it. It burned regular gasoline, not special fuels. 5 Shermans always beat 1 Tiger because 4 Shermans were always operational. German tank crews had a saying, the Tiger was the best tank in the war when it worked. The Me-262 jet fighter showcased German innovation and German delusion simultaneously. Revolutionary design, catastrophic execution, engines that lasted 25 hours before complete rebuilds, special fuels that Germany couldn't produce, runways that Allied bombers destroyed faster than Germans could repair. Meanwhile, America mass-produced conventional fighters that owned the skies through sheer numbers. Prisoner testimonies revealed the over-engineering problem infected everything. German aircraft engines were masterpieces of precision that required master craftsmen to build and maintain. American engines were good enough, built by teenagers, maintained by farm boys, and they flew every day. German submarines were technical marvels that spent more time in dry dock than at sea. American submarines were simple, reliable, and everywhere. The STG-44 assault rifle was arguably superior to any American infantry weapon. But Germany produced 425,000 during the war. America made 4 million M1 Garans, 1.5 million M1 carbines, and 7,000 Thompson submachine guns. Every American soldier had a semi-automatic weapon. Most Germans carried bolt-action rifles from the previous war. Technical superiority meant nothing when you were outnumbered 10-1. German optical equipment was genuinely superior. Zeiss lenses had no equal. But America produced adequate optics by the millions while Germany handcrafted thousands. American bombers had good enough bomb sights on every plane. German fighters had perfect gun sights on planes that lacked fuel to fly. The V-2 rocket program cost Germany as much as the Manhattan Project cost America. Germany got 3,200 rockets that killed 9,000 people. America got atomic weapons. Even in cutting-edge technology, American pragmatism beat German perfectionism. The rockets were engineering marvels that accomplished nothing. The atomic bombs were engineering brute force that ended the war. This reality broke the German technical officers among the POWs. Their entire worldview rested on German technical superiority, compensating for material disadvantages. But Americans had proved something devastating. In war, good enough in vast quantities beats perfection in small numbers, every single time. The German phrase Gründlichkeit meant thoroughness, perfection, completeness. Americans had a different word, effectiveness. German engineers spent years perfecting designs. American engineers asked, will it work well enough and can we build 10,000 next month? The letters home started optimistic and ended apocalyptic. Early prisoner mail, heavily censored but still revealing, maintained the party line. Temporary setbacks, wonder weapons coming. Final victory assured. But by mid-1943, the tone shifted dramatically. POWs had seen too much, understood too much, and felt obligated to warn their families. Don't believe the radio broadcasts, wrote Corporal Friedrich Müller to his wife in Hamburg. The Americans have more of everything than our leaders admit exists in the world. I've seen parking lots with more trucks than our entire army group possessed. Please believe me, the war is lost. Letters described American abundance in terms Germans couldn't comprehend. I eat better as a prisoner than I did as a sergeant, wrote Hans Dietrich. Fresh meat daily, real coffee, white bread. The guards throw away more food than you've seen in years. They complain about rationing while eating steaks. How can we defeat people who consider abundance a hardship? Some prisoners wrote detailed warnings about invasion preparations. I've seen the armies they're building, Lieutenant Colonel Otto Reinhardt told his family in Berlin. Not thousands of tanks, tens of thousands. They're not coming to defeat us, they're coming to erase us. Get out of the cities, find somewhere rural, survive what's coming. The emotional weight of these letters was crushing. Sons telling mothers the ideology they'd raised them with was a lie. Husbands telling wives their sacrifices were pointless. Fathers telling children their futures would belong to occupiers. The German postal censors began destroying these letters rather than delivering them. The truth was too dangerous for home front morale. But some messages got through, especially as the war turned. They're not barbarians, wrote Sergeant Klaus Weber about his captors. They're engineers. They've turned war into mathematics, and their numbers always win. We're fighting the future with the past. We're already history. The contrast letters were particularly painful. POWs described American workers complaining about overtime while German workers were collapsing from exhaustion. American mothers worried about their sons' comfort, while German mothers didn't know if their sons were alive. American newspapers debated post-war car models, while Germans wondered if there would be a post-war. Medical reports had special impact. "I've been treated for injuries our own doctors said were permanent," wrote Corporal Erich Hoffmann. "The camp dentist fixed teeth I've suffered with for years. They heal their enemies better than we heal our heroes. What does that say about our cause?" Technical officers wrote the most devastating assessments. "I've calculated the production rates," Major Wilhelm Becker informed his brother. "By the time you read this, America will have produced more aircraft than we've shot down. Tomorrow they'll produce more. The next day, even more. We're not losing, we've already lost." Some letters contained practical advice that revealed everything. "Learn English," Lieutenant Hans Kruger told his teenage son. "Study American methods. Forget everything I taught you about German superiority. Your future employers will be Americans, and they value different things than we do." By 1944, POW letters were describing invasion preparations with terrible precision. They'd seen the armies massing, counted the ships, calculated the tonnage. They knew what was coming. They tried to warn families in target cities. Most letters never arrived. Those that did were dismissed as enemy propaganda. The truth was harder to believe than the lies. The POW observations revolutionized military thinking about industrial warfare. Their reports, captured and analyzed after the war, showed that modern conflict wasn't won on battlefields but in factories. Strategy meant nothing without production. Tactics were irrelevant against overwhelming material superiority. The Americans had discovered something more powerful than any weapon: the total mobilization of industrial democracy. German officers realized their entire military doctrine was obsolete. Blitzkrieg worked against enemies with comparable production. Against America's industrial output, it was just a way to run out of fuel faster. Quick victories meant nothing if your enemy could replace losses faster than you could inflict them. The Americans had turned attrition warfare from a last resort into an optimal strategy. The flexibility observations were particularly important. German production required years of planning, months of retooling, weeks of adjustment. Americans changed entire production lines in days. When combat revealed Sherman tanks needed better armor, factories were producing upgraded models within weeks. When B-17s needed more defensive guns, the modification was standard within a month. This adaptability meant American forces constantly improved while German forces degraded. Logistics emerged as the supreme military science. Americans didn't win because they had better soldiers. They won because every soldier had unlimited ammunition, reliable vehicles, hot food, medical support, and mail from home. The best trained Wehrmacht division couldn't function without fuel. The greenest American division never lacked anything. Abundance beat experience every single time. The human factor revelations were devastating. German military culture emphasized obedience, sacrifice, and suffering. American military culture emphasized efficiency, comfort, and common sense. Americans' soldiers fought better when well-fed, well-rested, and well-supplied. German commanders thought hardship built character. Americans thought hardship reduced effectiveness. The Americans were right. Standardization emerged as a force multiplier beyond calculation. Every American rifle used the same ammunition. Every truck used the same parts. Every radio operated on the same frequencies. German forces used equipment from dozens of manufacturers with incompatible everything. An American supply sergeant could requisition any needed part and receive it within days. A German supply officer might spend months searching for specific components. The prisoner observations about American command structures were equally revolutionary. American junior officers had authority German colonels couldn't dream of. American sergeants made decisions German captains wouldn't dare. This decentralization meant American forces reacted faster, adapted quicker, and exploited opportunities German forces would spend days debating. Training differences were stark. American forces trained with live ammunition because they had unlimited supplies. They practiced with real equipment because they had extras. They rehearsed operations with actual fuel because rationing didn't exist. German forces trained with wooden mock-ups, practiced with imaginary ammunition, and rehearsed operations they'd never have fuel to execute. The air power observations were game-changing. Americans didn't use aircraft as flying artillery. They used aircraft as industrial products, manufactured in such quantities that losing dozens meant nothing. Every mission was a maximum effort because aircraft were expendable. German pilots flew cautiously because aircraft were irreplaceable. This difference in mindset created a difference in outcomes. The POW reports concluded with a harsh truth. Industrial democracy beat ideological totalitarianism. Free workers outproduced slave labor. Open societies generated innovation closed societies couldn't match. The war's outcome was predetermined by economic systems, not military prowess. Germany had lost the war before firing the first shot. The final image burned into every German POW's memory was the same. Trains pulling away from ports, heading back to Europe, passing endless convoys of American equipment heading to the same destination. While they sailed home to ruins and occupation, they watched infinite streams of American abundance following them. Ships loaded with food for former enemies. Trucks carrying rebuilding supplies. The same industrial might that had crushed them would now rebuild them. They returned to a Germany that didn't want to hear their stories. Their warnings had been ignored, their observations dismissed, their mathematics rejected. Now they walked through bombed cities, remembering American factories they'd seen producing more in an hour than these ruins had produced in a year. They'd witnessed the future and returned to find only past. Many POWs became the architects of German economic recovery. They'd learned American production methods, studied American management, understood American efficiency. The Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's economic miracle, was built by men who'd seen miracles become routine in American factories. They didn't rebuild German industry. They built American industry with German workers. The letters they'd written home became historical documents, testimony to the moment when warfare changed forever, when production became more important than courage, when logistics became more vital than strategy, when factory workers became more valuable than warriors. They'd witnessed the birth of a new world order, measured not in territories conquered, but in units produced per hour. Their children would grow up in a world shaped by American industrial methods, standardization, mass production, quality control, continuous improvement. The vocabulary of defeat became the language of recovery. The lessons learned in captivity became the curriculum for reconstruction. Germany's greatest defeat became its greatest education. Some POWs returned to America as immigrants, choosing to live in the society that had defeated and fed them. They worked in the factories they'd once observed with despair. They became American citizens, raised American children, lived American dreams. The nation that had crushed their homeland became their home. The factories that had built their defeat now built their futures. Today, their testimonies remain in archives. Engineers study their observations about production efficiency. Historians analyze their insights into industrial warfare. Military academies teach their lessons about logistics and supply. They were enemies who became witnesses, prisoners who became prophets, warriors who learned that the real war was won by workers they'd never see. The German POWs who saw American factories didn't just witness superior production. They witnessed the future of human organization. A future where power came from production lines, not bloodlines. Where victory belonged to those who could build faster, not fight harder. Where wars were won by anonymous workers in Detroit and Seattle and Los Angeles, not by heroes on distant battlefields. So here's your truth. Wars aren't won by warriors anymore. They're won by workers, by engineers, by factory managers checking production schedules. The next time you see a documentary about World War II, remember this. Every Sherman tank represented not just steel and engineering, but a fundamental truth. The side that can build more wins. Always has. Always will. Hit subscribe to hear more untold stories of how production lines changed history, because the factory floor is where empires rise and fall.